So today I'm going to present some of the research from my group BODIES, and BODIES stands for Biomechanical Optimization of Daily Life, Exercise and Sports. So we're interested in optimizing human movement control, and we're doing that on the one hand with predictive simulations, and also we try to gather as much data as possible in clinic and in field, and therefore we're working a lot on developing wearable sensors and wearable actuators to give real-time feedback. We're doing this both for top athletes, but also for rehabilitation patients. And a big topic in the group is aging. And this is what I'm going to tell you a bit about today. So within aging, we're interested in capacity versus compensation. And the work I'm showing today is called Why Do Older Adults Have Their Feet Closer Together Than Young Adults While Rising from a Chair? Well, to start off with this capacity versus compensation, as we age, of course, our capacity is declining. This starts around our mid-20s already in our neural system. And later on, we also see more and more decline in the muscular system and in the skeletal system. Well, initially, we don't notice much of this decline because we have quite some reserve. And even if we hit the boundaries of our task demands, we are quite good in compensating. And when I say compensating, I'm talking about if you have a specific task. So say you want to get out of a chair, you can do that without using your arms, or you can compensate for some sort of lack of capacity by using your arms by pushing off on the armrest. However, we say that a compensation is not always due to a lack of capacity. Capacity of a compensation can also be because you have altered movement objectives. For instance, you want to retain a certain margin of stability, or you want to avoid pain. And therefore, this adaptation and compensation is so interesting because first of all, we see a lot of the same adaptation and compensation strategies in all the adults. So it gives us a little bit of a peek into how we solve for functional redundancy. And at the same time, these adaptation strategies can be a really good early indicator of what's going on under the hood of the neuromuscular system. So we're analyzing this in two different ways. First of all, we're doing a lot of experimental work, but at the same time, we're also developing models. And basically what I always compare it with is the tower of Jenga. So we're trying to take out blocks of this tower, and it could be from a neuro, the muscular, of the skeletal system. And we're trying to, like, how many blocks can we remove and in what combination before the tower falls over. So to give a very simple idea, very simple model on this is if you take away certain reduce certain isometric forces, how do we see adaptation strategies in daily life activities and when do we hit our limits? But today I'm going to present you a little bit about the experimental work that we've done. So at the start of 2020, we finalized a kinematic data collection. And in this data collection, we collected data from 50 participants, both young women, young men, elderly women, and elderly men. And we let them do sit-to-walk strategies in a lab. So basically, we asked them to stand up from a chair, walk to a table. We let them do that 5 times at self-selected speed and 5 times at a fast speed, and collected the kinematics via VICOM. We collected the muscle activation patterns with 16 EMG sensors. We had an instrumented chair, so we could measure the forces on the seat and on the armrest, and also we had Kistler force plates on the floor, so we could measure the ground reaction forces. At the same time, we measured the capacity. So we looked at their strength with a dynamometer. We measured their nerve conductivity doing a nerve conduction study. We looked at balance, where we let them do a couple of balance tasks. We looked at their range of motion, the proprioceptive acuity, and did a questionnaire where we asked, for instance, about fear of falling, but also a level of dizziness, pain, and their former professions or any experienced injuries. So the analysis that we did on this data will be published soon, hopefully. We're in review at the Nature Partner Journal Aging. And one of the outcomes, which I also presented last year, is what we found is that older adults actually have their feet closer together than young adults while standing up. And we found a correlation with strength. So we saw that the people that had lower strength in the lower limbs actually had their feet closer together. This was amplified by the fact we found that lower CMAP amplitudes basically gave the same effect. And we saw that people that had their feet closer together usually had longer peripheral and age reflex latencies. We didn't find any correlation with any of the other results, so we didn't find any relationship with balance, range of motion, proprioceptive acuities, or any of the other measures from the questionnaire. And when I'm talking about base of support here, a smaller base of support, so it's basically a smaller distance in the medial lateral direction. So what we said in the discussion then was, well, we expected that the gait will be that the base support will be wider for all the adults, because that's very well known in walking or gait that all the adults have their feet wider apart. Also, we said, well, from a mechanical point of view, it must be more unstable to have your feet closer together. And we hypothesized that it could be subject to society standards, since women usually have their feet close together, and since they also have less strength, it might have sort of skewed our data. However, we see the same results when we just analyze the men. So then we said, okay, what's going on here? Why do older adults have their feet closer together? So we had 3 hypotheses. First of all, we said, well, maybe if you have your feet wider apart, it causes more lower limb strength. So we have higher joint moments in the lower limb. And that's why people have, all the adults keep their feet close together. It could also be that there are particular muscles that you're trying to unload by having your feet closer together and those muscles might be more prone to age-related decline. A third hypothesis was that maybe we have our feet closer together to reduce the neural demand for the task. So we said mechanically it's more unstable. But if you look at the paper at Bingham et al., they made a simplified model of standing balance. And they looked at, from a control point of view, whether it's easier to control a wider stance compared to a smaller stance, including the delays that are in the system. They found that there is a bigger solution space for when you have your feet closer together for the feedback gain compared to when you have your feet wider apart. So in that sense, it might be that there's a lower neural demand having your feet closer together. So we first wanted to test the first 2 hypotheses, and we couldn't collect new kinematic data due to restrictions at the moment. Hopefully we might be able to do that now. So what we did is we used the same data set, and from the experimental data set for only 50 participants, we selected the participants that within the self-selected speed trials had one trial where they had a small base support and a trial where they had a wide base support. And we said that they had small and wide if the difference between the 2 trials would be larger than 0.17 times the pelvis width, so about 1/5 of the pelvis width. We then compared the small versus the wide for these 12 participants, and of course none of these participants used their arms in standing up. We also made sure that we selected those participants. We estimated for them the joint moments, the muscle activations, and the muscle forces. And we did that using OpenSim. We used a standard previously developed by Raji Gopal et al. That was later corrected by Lionel. That model has 80 heel-type muscles for the lower extremities and is torque-driven on the upper extremities. We adjusted the maximum isometric forces based on cadaver studies on elderly people. And finally, we did a 2-sided t-test of the time series. And in this, we compared every normalized time sample basically to check on different times whether there was a difference in the trajectory. So that's how we did the trajectory comparison. So just to show you an insight into these only 12 participants. So what we did is we went from 0%, which is sitting, to 100%, which is end of the first step. We have the dashed lines, which is the stance leg, and the full line, which is the stepping leg. And then we have a wide base of support, which is the light gray, and a small base of support, which is the dark gray. Here I only show the sagittal plane, so ankle dorsiflexion, knee flexion, hip flexion, lumbar extension. And I think it's already quite clear there were no differences within the trajectories. Also not in the peak forces. The same thing we saw in the other planes, so also for the internal and external rotation and the abduction moments, which we expected to be different, were the same. Also for the muscle activation patterns, we didn't see any differences between the muscles within these 12 participants between wide and small. So based on this data set that we have, if you go back to our hypothesis, basically we can't say that there was a higher joint range of motion for the people that had their, or when people had their feet wider apart. Also, we didn't see any differences in muscle activations between the small versus the wide trial that participants did. Of course, I have to say that this is within the data that we collected. So it could be that the people didn't have their feet wide enough apart, and maybe it would be better to do an additional test with more participants in it. But so far, there are no indications that there is any difference between wide or small base support. Finally, the last one, which was that there's a smaller base of support, is a compensation to reduce the neural demand for the task. Which will be based on an article of Bingham et al. Well, this is something we might want to look into. Also because we saw that it is related to these neural changes in the nerve conduction velocities. So what we're doing now is we're using predictive simulations to test the neural demand hypothesis, but also test the joint moment hypothesis again. So what we do is in the simulation, we can have a wide base support, we can have a small base of support. We can compare the joint moments, but also the muscle recruitment from the two systems. At the same time, we can add perturbations to see which one has a bigger stability margin. And we could change the nerve conductivity, so the delay, we can increase the delays or we can increase the noise on the sensor of the motor noise. And with that, we're trying now with predictive simulation to see if we can test these hypotheses. I would like to thank my 3 master students who helped me out collecting this data in 2020. So that's Francisca Santini, Jana Worp, and Maud Hendriksen. And of course, I would like to thank Narissa Smith, who did the OpenSim analysis for this paper, for this abstract, who was working as a research assistant within the lab. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and thank you for listening.